So in case you guys weren't aware, Stellar Blade, it's been rumored that they've been thinking about, or there's talks about them going away from PlayStation in the sense of PlayStation taking care of the publishing, right? Well, apparently it has been confirmed. And I know a lot of you guys are major Stellar Blade fans. I'm a big fan of Stellar Blade. Love that game. And honestly, I can't wait to get to the sequel, especially now that I know what I know. But Shift Up has confirmed and said that the next Stellar Blade game is not only going well in terms of development, but that the company is going to publish the game itself worldwide. Now, this doesn't mean that the game is not going to come out on PlayStation. It is going to come out on PlayStation, obviously. However, they are now going to self-publish it. They're going to self-publish it, which is amazing, right? The first Stellar Blade was published by Sony, which we all know. And this time, Shift Up is going to handle everything themselves. Now, there was a lot of thoughts and rumors when Shift Up went through the controversy of censorship, right? Because everybody remembers how they censored some of the initial outfit designs. Now, granted, the censorship was small, but it was still very annoying. It was obviously there. They tried to gaslight people and say that, oh, no, that was totally going to be our designs. That was going to be our designs from day one. We just never put it on the 1.0 disc. It was bullshit. It was completely bullshit. Like the lies that Shift Up was saying in order to protect either themselves or Sony was so obvious, right? They absolutely censored the outfits. They didn't plan on it. And it all happened during the whole hard R, journalist combined attack. Remember when the journalists got together with a content creator who discovered in his early review, because he was reviewing the game, he ended up sending a clip to a bunch of journalists on a Discord server, and they all planned to run this story about the hard R controversy. They literally tried to make it seem as if Shift Up was racist because they had a shop called Hard, and then it had a neon sign that had an R next to it, so it was Hard R. It was all planned by the journalists to try to destroy Stellar Blade. Guess what? Didn't work. Right? Didn't work at all. It was their last minute attempt to try to take the game down because essentially there was a lot of momentum behind it and they didn't want to have another Black Myth Wukong, right? Now, the thing is, Black Myth Wukong had massive Chinese support, so that's why the numbers ended up going into the millions, right? In terms of concurrent players, it was a fucking insane movement, but it was also heavily supported by the West as well. But regardless, it had a lot of Chinese support. With Stellar Blade, there was a lot of Western support for this game, a lot of Asian support for this game too, and it ended up doing big numbers on PC. It ended up doing better on PC than it ever did on PlayStation. It ended up selling more on PC in just a couple of months in the time it took for it to sell the same amount on PlayStation in over a year, right? So people definitely were waiting for it to release on PC for a multitude of reasons, including all the obvious stuff that we already know, which is the mods, right? We already know that the mods were going crazy with Eve, but who cares? It's a single-player game. Mod your game however the fuck you want. Who cares, right? The point is, now that the game is going to be self-published, this is bringing up a conversation of, like, are they going to go down the same route, right? Are they going to potentially, either be more censorious with their outfits? Are they going to be more free with their outfits? Are they going to just, are we going to go down the same path? And the answer is honestly a little more complicated than that. I really don't know if we are or are not. And the problem with this is that people always forget this, and I constantly bring this up, okay? When Stellar Blade was first made, Shift Up was a private company, all right? People don't realize this. Shift Up was a private company. Now Shift Up is no longer private. Shift Up has officially gone public. They are a public company. They have investors. They have shareholders, all that stuff. They are a public company. They even started hiring for ESG record mandate, like keep holders, or whatever the fuck the name of the title is, right? Where basically you have to keep records of what you're doing for ESG impact. Now, that could be minimal impact, right? You could be a company that has a low score because you're not really involved in ESG oriented stuff like that. Every company has an ESG score. It's whether or not they have a high score or a low score, depending on what they do as a company. So even though they have to have, as a public company, somebody who keeps track of like ESG stuff, at the end of the day, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily partaking in it in the level of which other companies that obviously do, that are like super high scoring companies. I think Xbox is like a super high scoring company. But anyway, so it's hard to tell, right? It's hard to tell, but it is a red flag, right? Like the fact that they're a public company now is absolutely a red flag. So this is why I say I wouldn't go into this completely blind. I mean, to be fair, I wouldn't go into this completely blind for any game. Don't go into any game completely blind, no matter how good they did in their last game. Always look at them with a raised eyebrow, like, you know, they got to prove to you that they're worth the time. You're the buying customer, right? You're the one with the money. They got to prove to you that they're worth their time. So even though Stellar Blade 1 was great, and they did bend the knee a little bit in terms of what do you call it? In terms of censorship, a lot of people assume that the censorship knee bending was forced by Sony. If that is true, then this time around, it should not exist, right? This time around, it should not be a problem since they're self-publishing. So depending on how they handle Stellar Blade 2 will showcase whether or not those rumors about Sony were actually true or not, because we don't know if it was true or not. We could assume, but we don't actually know. So hopefully they don't get fucked with as a company. But, you know, again, since they went public, this could be a little concerning for people, right? Now, Yan Demand in the chat says Nikkei got us a victory. Has been Hypergooner for the last 2 years. They should be fine. That's true. However, the mindset for gacha games is a lot different than it is for AAA standard video game releases, right? So even though it's Hypergooner, again, I'm not talking about being Hypergooner. I just want the game to be made in their vision. It was very clear that the censorship that happened, even though it was small, the censorship that happened wasn't necessarily their initial vision. It's actually obvious that that was the case because the 1.0 version of the game didn't have that in there, right? It was patched in there. It was patched after the fact. It was patched after 1.0, which means that when the game went gold and it was ready to be released, it was ready to be released the way that it was, and they decided to change it after the fact. You know, so, but with gacha games, they have a different mindset. With gacha games, they are aiming for just like your pure money. Like they want your money and they're doing everything they can to try to get it. Right. So I think that what's allowed and what's not allowed from a supposed social standpoint is more acceptable with gacha games than it is with anything else. At least that's what I think anyway, because gacha games are played by a mass amount of people, but it's usually a lot of Asian market as well. But in any case, that's my mindset on that. So Sanguine says also there are black girls in Nikkei. Or is it actually black girls or is it like tanned Asians? You know what I mean? Like, have you ever seen that where it's like tanned Asian characters they're trying to pass off as black characters? You know what I'm saying? Tanned Asians, you know? Just like they were doing with, what was that game that they had that was supposedly like inspired by Native American lineage, and it was basically just tanned Asians. Oh, even Yan Demand says tanned Asians, no blacks in Nikkei. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I didn't think it was like actual black characters. Oh, that was Genshin Impact. Yeah, thank you, No Hearts Left. I remember that story. Yeah, where they did it in Genshin Impact, where they had characters and outfits that were inspired by like Native Americans and stuff. Supposedly, they took a little bit of inspiration from that, but then people were mad that they weren't actually brown, that they were just tanned Asians. You know. But in any case, so we'll see how this works. But let's see. It says some more stuff. So that means that it will control marketing, global sales, and fan engagement. The company wants full control to do a better job and sell more copies. Expect no censorship from Sony. Again, we don't know if the censorship actually came from Sony. All right, there are people that are peddling that as if it's true. We don't know if that's true. We can obviously assume that to be true based on the evidence that we have, but we don't actually know if that's 100% true. But I gotta imagine it probably is, but the only way we're gonna find out is depending on how they handle Stellar Blade 2. Also, considering, like you guys brought up Nikkei, considering how they handle that game and how they make their characters in that game, it's pretty obvious they have no problems with characters, female characters that are hyper attractive, that show off a little bit of skin. They have no problems with that, right? So to see that kind of censorship and to pretend to be, I guess, like, against that kind of stuff, or maybe a little bit more subtle, it just seemed like a personality shift that we actually saw with their other censorship of other characters that Sony has been known to censor. right? So this is kind of where we're at. The original game is still selling well on PC and consoles. In the first 3 months of 2026, it generated 12.9 billion Korean won, or 27.3% of the company's total revenue for that period. Wow, so this game is still selling well even now in 2026. This game made 12.9 billion Korean won in just 3 months of 2026. That's crazy, bro. It's insane how good Stellar Blade is selling on PC. The company plans to share more details about the Stellar Blade sequel and another game called Project Spirits later in 2026. I'm curious as to what are the chances we're going to see Stellar Blade 2 either at Summer Games Fest or the Game Awards. I feel like it would be more of an announcement for the Game Awards. I think they would wait for that because I think we're more likely to see it in 2027 than anything else. But considering that Summer Games Fest is around the corner, you never know. But still, I'm curious how that will go. Shift Up is also building its publishing team. It hired about 60 new developers through a partnership with Unbound, which we did hear about. So it's crazy, man. All these Asian teams that are finding success, right? Look at Pocket Pair. Pocket Pair with Palworld, they took their money. They made an ungodly amount of money. They made more money than they ever thought they would ever make. And they're taking that money and they turned it into a publishing company, Pocket Pair Publishing. And they're trying to publish a bunch of video games and become an actual real publisher. They were smart. They took their money and they created an entire other avenue of business to sustain themselves past just Palworld. So now people are going to look to them to be able to publish video. It's wild. It's very smart. Very, very smart. Shift Up's doing the same exact thing. They're trying to utilize the money and success that they got from Stellar Blade. And also they have money obviously from Nikkei. They're taking all this money. They're trying to become publishers as well. It's very, very, very smart. So we'll see what ends up happening with this. But again, guys, I wouldn't take this as a 100% guaranteed win because there are other concerns to be had with the company going public. I would hope that they do the right thing. I really would. But at the end of the day, we just don't know. We have to wait until we see the second game. I'm sure in the trailer, whenever they showcase that trailer, they're not going to have any problems showing off Eve in all the great ways and see how she looks and see how the world building is. And considering how the first game ended, she's going to be a totally different Eve. So we'll see how this goes. But again, guys, I wouldn't necessarily be worried, but just don't go all in just yet, you know? But they're very smart with what they're doing, so they know exactly how they're going about this. But that's basically it with Stellar Blade and the story around that situation.